by Richard Paul. Read for you today by Hugh Carr.
Evening, youth,
a mad fellow said, flinging a miniature Snickers bar onto my lap before taking the seat in front of me in the mostly empty train carriage. I paused for a moment, stared, moved the random confection onto the armrest, bid the man a polite good evening, and hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't.
Christ, what a pong!
He boomed over his shoulder to me, his left eye and plenty of teeth visible in the gap between the chairs.
Did you notice it when you came in?
I looked up at this noisy loon and figured there was nothing for it but to indulge him. Resisting the urge to sigh, I said quietly, "That's old Toby." I flicked my chin towards the back of the carriage, where a homeless greybeard was snoring. He's a regular enough sight on the train. Don't be rude. He was never the same after his wife died.
No, not him.
The loud stranger interrupted.
He can hardly help his reek. I'm talking about that ghastly swine 7 rows ahead. The one who smells like a plate of oily chips left in the rain. Now, he's certainly not homeless himself, and I can't smell any ailments about him, pun intended. So why do you suppose he's not washed in 2 weeks?
This rude person was making a conscious effort to speak over the sounds of the train in motion. I peered over his chair a moment and saw the back of a young man's head 7 rows away. I'd be very surprised if he hadn't heard this attack on his character, but he gave no sign. One way or another, he just stared dead ahead.
Imagine you're a writer, assuming you're not already. For some reason, you have it in mind to create such a character. Young, not bad looking, not too badly off, but they're resolved not to bathe. Why are they like that? What's their motivation?
Perhaps the proper thing would have been to defend the maligned commuter from this tirade, but I didn't. I was not a writer. I worked security at the docks, an uneventful job spent standing about in the cold, which I'd actually been on my way to that night when this clamouring git appeared. I think that, anticipating another tedious night at work, I was tempted by the sliver of distraction he offered. I was not, in that moment, much moved to empathy. My father often used to tell me to be sparing with it. Perhaps he snuck out of bed when he was 6 or so to watch TV. He switched it on just in time to see the shower scene from Psycho and never got over his terror.
People have stayed for less,
the man said, his eye fixed on mine, never moving and barely blinking.
But I think you can do better than that. Try to come up with something no one else has ever contrived. You have 51 seconds. Go.
Why 51?
49 seconds.
Well, that was that then. I pondered and grabbed at the first idea that occurred to me, piling details on to try to make it as unique as possible. 5 seconds to polish, and then... His aunt who raised him died suddenly. He was overjoyed at first, as she was a monstrous old bint who used to burn his thighs with the coal poker. Trouble is, a demon brought her soul back from hell a week later and stuffed it inside his body. Now she's a maddened and maddening wraith, tormenting his every dream with her memories of hellfire and the like, and, well, with that to deal with, showering hasn't really been a priority. He stared at me for a moment, his face completely expressionless. I imagined a score of judgmental thoughts running behind his eyes, with far greater ease than I'd found for the scenario I'd just contrived. At last, with the Silfield station approaching, he said,
"Why's he sitting so calmly on a train, then?"
Before I could contrive an answer, he stood up and grinned, looking down at me.
"Sorry, that's a bit excessive of me, isn't it?"
He leaned forward over the headrest just as the train came to a peaceful stop.
It was at least more promising than most answers I get. Yes. Yes, I think you'll do nicely.
He pushed his face right up to mine. I raised a hand to push him back when all of a sudden his face changed, twisted, for just long enough for him to say, "Follow," in a voice that was not human, though his face was once again human in the next instant. Then he stood up and walked to the train's closest exit, stood courteously aside for a woman with a pushchair who was boarding, and then stepped onto the platform. And I followed. This wasn't my stop. Getting out here guaranteed I'd be late for work, and I'm not in the habit of following mad strangers when they tell me to. However, I followed after him, whoever and whatever he was, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world to do so.
Oh, that's better. Fresh air, am I right?
His voice was also human once more and markedly friendly, as we walked from the station down barely lit pavements to who knows where.
If time wasn't so against me, I'd have gladly walked the distance from Drenford to here. My sense of smell, you see, is better than most. Tends to make public transport an unpleasant thing.
It was then that right and proper human reactions started to break through the odd compulsion I had to simply follow this man or monster. There was shock. What the hell is he? There was panic. This fucker's probably bringing me back to his nest so his children can eat me. And that was the most wholesome of my speculations. And lastly, somehow a nagging insistence that I should phone Mr. Langtry, my employer, and let him know I'd be late for my shift. The mundane bullshit just refused to die, even as I walked to my probable doom, with a creature who, as we passed the village park, started talking about how the local cricket team finally received the funding it needed to start competing for the county cup next year. That conversational spiel was bewitching. It reassured some part of me, in spite of all reason. It made me walk another 50 steps before my brain once again thought not to.
"We're here,"
he said, looking towards an unassuming bungalow on the horizon, a black silhouette beside 5 or 6 like it, some place dark and very far away from anyone's inquisitive glare. Seeing it lent some strength to my panic. Now or never, escape or death, or worse. I tried to stop myself, and the more I tried, the more my head began to hurt. A tightening anguish which eased when I stopped fighting the compulsion to follow. The man was walking slower now, almost as if he was giving me more of a chance to resist. "Fuck you!" I howled, half at him, half at the pain. Near blind and senseless, I forced myself to turn and flee. It was a pitiful spectacle. Imagine a power walker with a hangover wading through treacle. He could have caught me. Hell, maybe he could have used the voice and ordered me back. But he didn't. I kept shambling forward, and the more I did, the more the pain seemed to ease off. There was still an ungodly pounding in my skull, but it faded enough for me to focus on what was in front of me, which stopped me from blundering into a lamppost. I soon found myself strong enough to sprint, and that's what I did, charging back the way we'd come. When I chanced to look behind, expecting to see the monster's grasping hand reaching for my shoulder, I instead saw his small, distant figure right where I'd left him. I couldn't make out much from this distance, but I could tell he was staring straight at me, and then his face did something. It was as if his cheeks and chin stretched outwards away from the other, revealing what must have been a titanic maw. It lasted only a moment. Then, in the next moment, I saw his face return to normal. He raised a hand to wave at me, then turned about and started walking to his door. With dread chilling my spine, I started sprinting again. I didn't stop until I reached the train station, fell wheezing to my knees beside a row of black taxis, and violently threw up on the adjacent pavement, earning no end of stares. I'm not sure what's wrong with me exactly. I felt fine when I got on the train. Next thing I know, I'm feeling like shite. I had to get off at Silfield and made it halfway to the bogs before throwing up. I could see Langtry's grimacing face in my mind's eye, and hear the string of swears he'd doubtless part with as soon as I hung up.
Is it just a one-off thing? Can you still make it?
My stomach feels like it's been kicked in. My legs are shaking and I've got a bastard of a headache. I don't think I'm going to be of much use tonight. Don't tell them you're not feeling well enough to work. Tell them that you can't be of use to them.
That's not what I really want to be hearing, Matt.
It's not what I want to be saying, but it is how it is. There was a moment of quiet. He knew that I was reliable enough not to contrive sick days on a lazy whim. He'd sacked at least a dozen such watchmen since I'd been working for him for that very reason.
You okay to get home?
I think so. There's a train heading back in 10 minutes, and it's not far to walk from the station.
Right.
His tone softened a little at the reassurance he wouldn't need to call me a taxi.
I'll cover your shift tonight. But that means you're covering mine on Saturday, alright?
Yeah, no worries. I'm sure I'll be fine by then. I paused and made myself add, thanks.
Yeah, right. Well, get yourself home then. Feel better.
I'd never before heard the words, feel better, uttered with such spite. Cheers, I said, hanging up. Perhaps you're thinking, why the hell was I worrying about my shift in the wake of all that had just happened? The facts of reality were changed utterly, and some hypnotizing monster just tried to lure me into his lair. What did it matter? Then again, perhaps you already have experience with rising rent, excessive heating costs, and paltry wages. I stood up, moved towards the station's main entrance, and instantly stopped dead. The thought of my nightly commute, which I'd taken time and again for the better part of 2 years, now stopped me cold. Things had seemed so normal just a moment ago. Calling the boss, watching the sparse yet constant evening crowd come and go, hearing muffled departure announcements over the barely functional tannoy. All the same, I stood by the entrance and my body utterly refused to let me walk in. I turned around and took a quick stroll round the nearby streets, resolving to steady my nerves. I'll be the first to admit how ludicrous that was. Leaving the relative safety of the train station and risking the shadows of empty streets, whose like I'd lately walked with a monster no less. And all so I might feel safer. Foolproof. For all that, I did start to feel better. The fresh air feeling all the sweeter for the rest of me feeling like shit. I walked by the ordinary houses of ordinary people, tried to find one with their curtains not yet drawn, so that I might steal a passing glance at a family at dinner or watching TV or something proper for a Wednesday night. Instead, I heard a woman scream. It was short and shrill, coming from an alley set between a former pharmacy and a restaurant with the unlikely name Kitchen Sticks. I dared not go inside the train station, but I did dare charge into a lightless alley to face almost certain peril. What I found, lit only by the neon blue glow of a street light at the end of the alley, was not the mugger I'd been expecting, but instead a young woman, doubtless the screamer, stood frozen in the shadows, looking straight at me. It made for a strange sight, but I paid that little heed as I stepped up to her, my thoughts so delightfully ordinary. Was she okay? Had her attacker run off? When I got close enough, I got a proper look at her. She was a 20-something brunette, barely 5 feet tall, dressed in a blue Sandors stationer's uniform under a cheap black coat. Presumably, she'd been heading home from work when she'd been attacked.
"Are you okay?"
I asked. She nodded and stepped towards me. Then, she reached forward with one small hand and grabbed my wrist. Then she giggled. "Got you." Her voice, and with it her face, were the same unnatural things I'd seen and heard when the creature on the train bid me follow him. My eyes went wide, my body instantly cold, and I tried to pull away, but this tiny woman held my wrist as securely and effortlessly as if I were a toy doll. She thrust her face close to mine, but now it was the young, pretty face you'd expect it to be, smiling widely at me whilst with her other hand she snatched my own and held it tightly.
"Come on, let's get out of here,"
her now human voice said.
"The night's getting on and we have somewhere to be."
She began to walk out of the alley back the way I'd come. I could do nothing but walk with her. She wouldn't stop, and trying to pull back against her insane strength would do nothing but dislocate my arm. So we walked for a time, back towards the bungalow, hand in hand. To the sight of a casual observer, we were ordinary boyfriend and girlfriend, probably heading home from work.
"Who are you?"
I finally managed to ask, my throat suddenly dry.
"Sarah.
Just Sarah?
Sarah Brooks."
"What is all this?" I finally asked after a moment of silence. She just giggled again.
"Aren't you going to introduce yourself?"
"Matt Corcoran." A homeless man stopped us and asked for a handout. Sarah looked at me expectantly and, awkwardly, with only one hand, I extracted a £20 note and handed it to him. Grateful and stoned, the man told my new kidnapper that I was a keeper. Then he wandered off.
"That was generous,"
Sarah commented as she pulled me along again.
"Yeah, well, it was all I could really get out of my wallet with one hand." "Don't worry about it. You won't have any need for money after tonight."
I tried on instinct to pull away. It was like fighting against a statue, and Sarah paid my efforts no heed at all. She just kept walking, and soon enough, so did I. I felt tears start to gather, but I forced them back angrily. That was something I could fight at least.
"What are you?"
I finally asked, in answer to which she squeezed my hand, making me bite back a pained yelp.
"Don't be rude."
I pondered a reply for so long that the bungalow I'd fled came back into view, and there by the door was the man from the train. If I'd been afraid to enter the train station, imagine how my body reacted to this. I stopped dead and fought against Sarah's grasp. In answer, she turned to face me, let go of my hand, and hugged me tightly.
"It's okay, it's okay,"
she insisted.
"There's nothing to worry about. Listen, I'm right here. Trust me, there is nothing to worry about."
She rested her head against my chest and held on to me as if she was a concerned friend trying to help me through a panic attack. And somehow, this actually calmed me down. I started to notice the instinctive comfort of kind words and a woman's warm embrace. The more she reassured me, the more my brain started entertaining the idea that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd misread everything and imagined every danger. But then she pulled back and grabbed my hand again, and I saw the lack of any kind sincerity in her expression. She had the eyes of a cat in front of a birdcage.
"Ready?"
she finally asked.
Ready for what?
I all but yelled at her on the quiet street, to which she squeezed my hand again, harder than before.
Ready? Yes!
With no options left to me save perhaps a dignified end, I walked with her to the house, my head held high. I suppose I could have called for help. Maybe some concerned citizens would come to try to rescue me from the tiny stationery store employee. No, I doubt it would have worked. And it would have been beneath me. I looked at her as we walked, squeezed her hand a little and tried to contrive some hint of normalcy from my last ever night. The man from before walked up to meet us and clapped me on the shoulder when he was close enough.
Well, fuck you too.
He said, laughing, to which Sarah rolled her eyes.
Want to know something funny?
He asked me. I nodded, numbly.
If you hadn't proved half so interesting, I'd have left you on the train.
And
Sarah added,
if you hadn't charged to my rescue in that alley and walked away instead, I wouldn't have gone after you.
They've no interest in dullards, you see, nor cowards.
You're a victim of your own virtues,
Sarah added, patting my arm with her free hand. Part of me wondered what that foul-smelling man on the train would make of this.
Now, what say we go inside?
The man I would never learn his name said, shivering theatrically.
It's chilly out here.
I took one last look at the street behind me. As I was pulled to the door, an old woman with an unfriendly face glared at us from behind a nearby bungalow window. Doubtless she was some neighborhood watch cretin, wondering if she needed to phone the police or not. I gave her a sad wave as I followed the man into the copper-smelling lair, before Sarah shut and locked the door behind her. You have listened to You'll Do by Richard Paul, written especially for this channel. Richard has a whole lot of other stories, poems and other things of interest on his channel. I'll put a link to it down in the description. Please go along and have a look at it. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel, pushing the like button and leaving a comment. It's one of the best ways to help push this channel along. So please leave a comment. If I happen to select your comment as my favorite comment for this week, I'll devote the next story to you or someone that you care about. So don't be shy, let me know what you think, say hello, or just write the recipe of your favorite pudding. If you have the means, you can support this channel by pushing the thanks button and donating whatever you like. Every tiny little bit helps. Thank you very much. Another story will be coming out in 2 weeks. Until then, look after one another, stay curious, and please, please remember to
look out for the shadows.